The text came late at night. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about the trip. We've decided to postpone it until next year." I blinked at the message, my heart sinking. Postponed? We'd been planning this trip for months, our first family vacation in years. I'd rearranged my work schedule, budgeted every penny, and counted down the days like a kid waiting for Christmas. I called my mom immediately. She sighed as she answered, "Alyssa, I know you're disappointed, but things are just tight right now. We can't afford it." I swallowed hard. I understood money struggles, I really did. I had been working extra shifts at the cafe just to pitch in for this trip, even offering to cover my own airfare. But something about the way she said it, like the decision had already been made, like my feelings didn't matter, felt like a slap in the face. I took a breath. If it's about money, maybe we can find a cheaper hotel or shorten the trip. She hesitated, just for a second, but I heard it. "Alyssa," she said gently, "it's just not the right time. We'll make it happen next year, I promise." A promise. One I should have known better than to believe. 2 days later, I was scrolling through Facebook on my lunch break when my stomach dropped. There it was. A picture of my mom and dad on a beach. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. Sun-kissed skin, drinks in their hands, the ocean stretching behind them, glistening under the afternoon sun. I swallowed hard and scrolled down. More photos. My brother Jake posing with his girlfriend on a boat. My parents at a seafood restaurant, smiling over plates of lobster. And then the caption that made my blood run cold. "Family time is priceless." Family time. Except I wasn't there. Because according to them, the trip had been postponed. I locked my phone and sat frozen at the cafe counter, my mind racing. I wanted to believe there was an explanation. Maybe it was a last-minute work thing. Maybe someone had gifted them the trip. But deep down, I knew the truth. They hadn't postponed anything. They had just decided that I wasn't part of it. That night, I didn't call my mom. I didn't respond to the post. Instead, I watched in silence as more photos poured in over the next few days. They went snorkeling. They had bonfires on the beach. They made memories. Without me. And as I stared at each picture, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about the trip. This was about all the times I had been the afterthought. All the birthdays they had forgotten. All the holidays where my gifts were an afterthought while Jake got exactly what he wanted. All the times I made sacrifices for them, but they never did the same for me. I clenched my jaw and took a deep breath. They thought I would be too hurt to say anything, that I would just let it go. But this time, I was done being the forgotten one. They didn't know I had seen the photos, so when they got home a week later, I was waiting for them, and I had a plan. I heard the taxi pull into the driveway and watched from the kitchen window as my mom, dad, and Jake stepped out, dragging their suitcases behind them. They looked tired but happy, sun-kissed from their postponed trip. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. They didn't know I had seen the photos. Not yet. The front door swung open, and my mom was the first to spot me. "Alyssa," she said, her voice overly bright. "Oh, sweetheart, I missed you. How have you been?" I folded my arms. "Busy," I said flatly. My dad walked in behind her, setting his bags down. "That's good. How's work?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. Work. That was all I had done. Work and scroll through their pictures while pretending I didn't exist to them. Jake yawned, stretching his arms. "Man, I'm exhausted. Traveling takes it out of you." He turned to me with a smirk. "Hope you held down the fort while we were gone." My eyes snapped to him. While we were gone. Like it was normal. Like nothing was wrong. Like I hadn't spent the last week replaying their betrayal over and over. I took a deep breath. No more pretending. I turned to my mom, my voice eerily calm. "So, how was the trip?" She blinked, hesitating. "Oh, well, we just needed a little getaway. Nothing too special." Liar. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and turned the screen toward them. The photo album, the beach selfie, the boat ride, the fancy dinner, and the caption that made my stomach turn all over again. Family time is priceless. I tilted my head. Looks special to me. Silence. Thick, heavy silence. Then, my mom let out a nervous laugh. Alyssa, Don't. My voice was sharp, cold. Just don't. My dad cleared his throat. Look, sweetheart, it wasn't... Stop, I said, my voice rising. Just tell me the truth. You never postponed the trip. You just didn't want me there. I saw the guilt flash across my mom's face, but she quickly masked it with a weak excuse. It wasn't like that, honey. We just thought... What? That I wouldn't notice? I snapped. That I wouldn't see the pictures? That I'd be stupid enough to believe your lie? Jake groaned, rolling his eyes. Oh my God, Alyssa. Are you seriously making this a big deal? It was just a trip. Just a trip. The words hit me like a slap. That I planned. That I saved up for. That I was supposed to be a part of. I shook my head. You could have told me the truth, but instead, you lied. You made me feel like I wasn't worth bringing. Jake scoffed. You're being dramatic. I let out a bitter laugh. No, Jake, I'm finally being honest. My mom stepped forward, reaching for my hand. Alyssa, please. I pulled away. Not this time. They needed to hear this. This isn't just about the trip. It's about every single time I've been treated like I don't matter. Every holiday where Jake got exactly what he wanted, and I got whatever was convenient. Every time I put you guys first and you didn't even notice. I swallowed, my voice shaking. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I gave enough, I'd finally be enough for you. But I never was I? No one said a word. Finally, my mom sighed. Alyssa, it's not like we love Jake more than you. I let out a small, bitter smile. Maybe you don't, but it sure feels that way. Another silence. And that was my answer. I nodded, exhaling sharply. Got it. Then, without another word, I grabbed my purse and walked toward the door. Alyssa, where are you going? My dad called. I didn't look back. Somewhere I'm actually wanted. And then I left. For the first time in my life, I put myself first. For days, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from them, but I was done fixing things. This time, they could figure it out without me. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't respond to their messages. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing to fix things. It was strange at first, ignoring them. The guilt crept in like an old habit, whispering in the back of my mind. Maybe you're overreacting. Maybe you should just let it go. But then, I would remember. The text saying the trip was postponed. The Facebook posts of them having fun without me. The lie they told without a second thought. And suddenly, the silence felt like freedom. By the 5th day, their messages had shifted. At first, they had been firm and dismissive, trying to regain control of the situation. Mom, Alyssa, we need to talk about this. You're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. Dad, ignoring us isn't going to change anything. Call your mother. Jake, Jesus, Alyssa, get over it. You're acting like a child. I rolled my eyes. Classic. They weren't sorry. They just wanted me to stop making them uncomfortable. But when I didn't answer, the tone of their messages shifted. Mom, sweetheart, please. We miss you. We never meant to hurt you. Dad, we should have handled things differently. Let's talk. And then, the one that nearly got me. Mom, Alyssa, I feel awful. I can't sleep knowing you're upset with us. For a brief moment, I almost responded. Almost. But then I asked myself a question. If I had never seen the photos, would they have ever told me the truth? Would they have ever felt guilty at all? The answer was painfully clear. So I locked my phone and let the silence continue. It wasn't easy. I had spent years being the one to reach out first, the one who smoothed things over, the one who made excuses for them. So sitting with the silence, holding my boundary, felt unnatural at first. But as the days passed, I realized something. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because they missed the role I played in their lives. The fixer, the peacekeeper, the afterthought who never made waves. And now that I was refusing to be that person, they didn't know what to do. A week after their return, I did something I had never done before. I booked a weekend trip for myself. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet cabin in the mountains, far away from everything. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and left, without telling anyone where I was going. For once, I wasn't asking for permission. I wasn't waiting to be included. I was just living for myself, and it felt amazing. By the time I got back, my phone was full of missed calls and texts, but I didn't rush to respond. I wasn't ready yet, because for the first time in my life, I was finally putting myself first, and I wanted to enjoy the feeling a little longer. They weren't used to me ignoring them, so when my silence lasted longer than they expected, they showed up at my door, and I was ready. I knew it was coming. The moment I ignored their calls, their messages, their guilt trips, I knew my parents wouldn't just let it go. So when I heard the knock on my door that Saturday afternoon, I wasn't surprised. I took a deep breath, setting down my coffee. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I was ready. I opened the door to find my mom and dad standing on my porch. They looked different. Not angry, not smug, not demanding. They looked nervous. "Alyssa," my mom said softly, tucking her purse under her arm. "Can we come in?" I leaned against the doorframe. "Depends," I said evenly. "Are you here to actually listen, or just to tell me why I'm wrong for being upset?" My dad sighed. "We're here to talk, really talk." I studied their faces. They weren't ordering me to let them in. They weren't dismissing my feelings like they had in their messages. They were asking. That was new. I stepped aside. "Fine," I said. "Come in." I led them into the living room. The air felt thick with things unsaid. My mom sat on the couch, hands folded in her lap. My dad stayed standing, like he wasn't sure if he belonged. I sat across from them, arms crossed, waiting. It was my mom who finally spoke first. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. "The truth is a good place," I said flatly. She flinched. My dad exhaled through his nose. "We messed up." I blinked. I hadn't expected him to say that. My mom looked down at her hands. "Alyssa, when we said the trip was postponed, it was a lie. No excuses, no dancing around it, just the truth." I swallowed, my throat tight. "Why?" She hesitated, then finally said, "We thought it would be easier." Easier. Just like she had texted me. I clenched my jaw. "Easier for who?" Silence. "For you?" I pressed. "For Jake?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Because it sure as hell wasn't easier for me." My dad ran a hand over his face. "We didn't think it would hurt you this much," I scoffed. "You didn't think at all." My mom's voice cracked. "We thought you'd understand." Understand. The same word they had used in their messages. The word that meant nothing. I leaned forward. "Tell me the truth. If I hadn't seen those pictures, would you have ever told me?" Neither of them spoke. That was my answer. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced my voice to stay steady. "Do you have any idea what that felt like? To see you all having fun without me? To know that I was never even considered?" My mom's eyes shimmered with guilt. "Alyssa, we love you." I shook my head. "You don't treat people you love like that." My dad sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We failed you, sweetheart. We should have been honest." I stared at him, then at my mom. "Why are you really here?" I asked. "To apologize? Or to make yourselves feel better?" They hesitated. Then my mom said, "Both." At least that was honest. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, my mom said, "I don't know how to fix this." I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of all the years of being second place. And I realized something. I didn't need them to fix it. I just needed them to understand it would never be the same. "I don't know either," I admitted. "But I do know this. I'm not going to be the one to fix it for you." My dad nodded, slow and understanding. My mom wiped at her eyes. "What do we do now?" I met her gaze. "That's up to you." They thought an apology would be enough, but apologies don't erase years of being treated like an afterthought. This time, they had to prove they were willing to change. Apologies were easy. Change? That was the hard part. After my parents left that day, I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel like anything had really been fixed. They had admitted their mistake. They had apologized. But I had heard apologies before. It was their actions that had always told a different story. And this time, I wasn't interested in words. I wanted proof. For the first time in my life, I didn't go out of my way to reach out first. I didn't text them good morning. I didn't send updates about my life. I didn't check in to see if they needed anything. For the first time, I made them do the work. And at first, nothing happened. Days passed, then a week, then 2, and I thought, there it is. That's the proof I needed. If I wasn't the one putting in the effort, there was no effort at all. I should have known. I should have expected it. But somehow, it still hurt. It wasn't until the 3rd week that things started to shift. It was a random Tuesday when my mom called. I let it go to voicemail. Then came a text. "Mom. Hey, sweetheart. Just thinking about you. Hope you're doing okay." A part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep the distance. But another part of me, the part that had been waiting for any sign that they actually cared, hesitated. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I waited. The next day, my dad texted too. "Dad, miss you, kid. Let's get dinner sometime." I stared at the message, emotions colliding inside me. Not because I was ready to let them back in, but because for the first time, they were trying. I agreed to dinner. Not because everything was forgiven. Not because I was ready to pretend like nothing had happened, but because I needed to see if they were serious. We met at a quiet restaurant, just the 3 of us. Jake wasn't there, and that alone told me they had been paying attention. We sat down, and for the first time in years, my parents asked me about me. Not about Jake, not about work, not about whether I could help them with something. Just me. I wasn't sure if it was genuine or if they were just trying to fix what was broken, but for the first time, they were actually listening. And that was new. Halfway through dinner, my mom cleared her throat. "We've been thinking a lot about what you said," she said carefully, "about how we've treated you." I took a sip of my water, staying silent. She continued, "And we've realized that we've always assumed you didn't need us the way Jake did, that because you were strong and independent, we didn't have to put in as much effort." I met her gaze. "And now?" She swallowed. "And now we know that was wrong." I glanced at my dad. He nodded. "We see it now, Alyssa." "We do." For a moment, I didn't know what to say, because those were the words I had been waiting for my whole life. And yet, part of me still didn't believe them. Not yet. By the time dinner ended, something had shifted. Not in a dramatic, everything is fixed way, but in a, maybe this time they actually mean it way. They still had a long way to go. But for once, they were the ones taking the first steps. And for now, that was enough. But words were still just words. And if they really wanted to fix things, they were going to have to prove it. Dinner had gone better than I expected. But I wasn't naive. I knew that one meal, one conversation, wasn't enough to undo years of being treated like an afterthought. I wasn't looking for a quick fix. I wasn't looking for another empty apology. If my parents truly wanted to change, they had to prove it. The first real test came a week later. It was my birthday. And if history had taught me anything, it was that birthdays in our family had never been fair. Jake's birthdays were always a big deal. Parties, gifts, dinner reservations at whatever fancy restaurant he wanted. Mine? A card. Maybe a phone call, if they remembered. So I told myself I wouldn't expect anything this year. I told myself I wouldn't care. And yet, when I woke up that morning, there was still a small part of me, the part that still wanted to believe they could change, that hoped, And this time, they didn't forget. At exactly 10 a.m., there was a knock on my door. I frowned, setting down my coffee. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I saw my mom and dad standing there, holding a cake. My breath caught. They had never done this before. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," my mom said, offering me a tentative smile. I blinked at them. "You remembered?" My dad let out a small chuckle. "Of course we did." And for once, I believed them. They didn't just drop off the cake and leave. They actually spent the day with me. We didn't do anything extravagant, just a quiet afternoon at my place, talking, catching up, eating cake that was a little too sweet, but still perfect because it was mine. There were no rushed goodbyes. No feeling like I was just an obligation. For the first time in a long time, it felt like they wanted to be there. And I didn't realize how much I had needed that until it actually happened. A few weeks later, they proved it again. I had a big presentation at work, something I had been nervous about for weeks. I had mentioned it briefly over dinner one night, not thinking much of it. But when the day came, I got a text from my mom. "Mom, thinking of you today. You're going to do great." And then one from my dad. "Dad, let us know how it goes, kiddo. Proud of you no matter what." I stared at my phone for a long moment. They had never done this before. I wasn't used to them remembering the little things. And yet, here they were. Trying. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments where old habits crept back in. Mom still occasionally defaulted to making excuses for Jake. Dad still struggled to express himself in more than a few words. But the difference? They caught themselves. They noticed when they messed up. And they tried to do better. And that mattered. One night, a few months later, my mom called me. Not for anything in particular, just to talk. And at some point in the conversation, she sighed. "I know it's going to take time," she said carefully, "for you to trust us again." I swallowed. "Yeah." A pause. Then, "We're not giving up, Alyssa. You're too important to us." I felt my throat tighten, because for the first time, I believed her. But for the first time in my life, I finally felt like I mattered. Change didn't happen overnight. There were still moments when I caught myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for my parents to slide back into their old habits, for them to forget, to stop trying. But weeks passed, then months. And they kept showing up. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't effortless. But for the first time in my life, I finally felt like I mattered. One evening, I was sitting on my back porch, sipping tea, when my phone buzzed. It was Mom. Not an apology, not a guilt trip, just a simple text. "Mom, thinking of you. How's your week going?" I stared at the screen, something warm settling in my chest, because that message wouldn't have existed a year ago. A few weeks later, I got another surprise. I had been saving for a trip, a solo vacation, just for me. I hadn't told my family much about it, mostly because I didn't want to deal with their opinions. But then, one night at dinner, my dad asked, "So when's your trip?" I blinked. "You remember?" He smirked. "Of course. It's Italy, right?" My mom nodded. "We were actually talking about it the other day. Do you need help with anything? Packing? Planning?" I studied them carefully, waiting for some catch. But there wasn't one. They weren't offering because they wanted something in return. They were offering because they wanted to be part of my life. And that was new. The night before my flight, I got a text from Jake. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. "Jake, Mom won't say it, but she's freaking out about you traveling alone. You know how she is." I rolled my eyes. Typical. Then another message came through. "Jake, you're actually doing it, huh? Living your life on your own terms." I hesitated before replying. Me. "Yeah, I am." There was a long pause before his final message arrived. "Jake, that's kinda badass, sis." As I stepped off the plane in Rome, the weight of the last year settled on me. I had spent so much of my life waiting for my parents to see me, waiting for them to include me, waiting for the day when I wouldn't feel like an afterthought. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I was choosing myself. I had built a life where I didn't have to chase their approval. And somehow, in doing that, they had finally learned how to show up for me. A few days into my trip, I was sitting at a cafe when my phone buzzed. A group message. "Mom, we just saw your latest photos. Rome looks amazing. Call us soon? We miss you." I smiled. Not because I needed their approval, but because for the first time, they weren't just saying the words, they meant them. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. You shouldn't have to beg for love. You shouldn't have to fight to be included. And if the people around you don't see your worth, choose yourself. Because sometimes when you stop waiting to be seen, that's when they finally notice.